The 2026 World Cup is right around the corner, but one of football's biggest nations will not be there, and the reason has nothing to do with what happens on the pitch. Russia, a country that hosted the World Cup just 8 years ago, reached the quarterfinals on home soil and appeared at 11 World Cup tournaments across its history. We'll watch the biggest football event on the planet from the sidelines. And the more you dig into the full story, the more explosive it gets. Because right now, the man at the top of world football wants that ban lifted. And the reaction from across Europe has been absolutely volcanic. This is not just a story about sanctions. This is a story about power, politics, war, and the uncomfortable question of whether football can ever truly stay separate from the world around it. Stick with us, because before this video ends, we are going to get into exactly why FIFA's own president is now fighting against a ban that FIFA itself imposed, why Ukraine and most of Europe are furious about it, and what this whole saga tells us about the state of world football heading into the biggest tournament in history. On the 24th of February 2022, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 4 days later, the Bureau of the FIFA Council suspended Russia's national teams from participation in FIFA competitions. The men's team had been due to play in qualifying playoffs in March for the World Cup in Qatar later that year, while the women's side had already qualified for the European Championship in England. In a single statement, both were gone. Decades of football history erased overnight. FIFA and UEFA issued a joint declaration confirming that all Russian national teams and all Russian clubs were banned from international competition until further notice. The words were clear. The message was unmistakable. Football was not going to stand by while a war unfolded in Europe. The IOC had already pushed dozens of sports governing bodies to exclude Russian athletes and officials from international events, saying this action was needed to protect the integrity of global sports competitions and for the safety of all participants. Football followed, and for a moment, the sport felt genuinely united. But Russia was not going down without a fight. The Football Union of Russia appealed the decision to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. CAS rejected the request to freeze FIFA's suspension, which effectively ended Russia's hopes of competing in the 2022 World Cup. They tried again. They fought through the legal system, and every single time the answer came back the same. In July 2022, CAS dismissed Russia's appeals of the decisions by both FIFA and UEFA to ban them from all competition. The ban held. Russia was out of Qatar, out of Euro 2024, and now, out of the 2026 World Cup in North America. Here is where the story takes a turn that almost nobody saw coming. In February 2026, just months before the World Cup kicks off, FIFA President Gianni Infantino sparked fresh controversy by declaring that Russia's ban from international football should definitively be lifted. Let that sink in. The president of the very organization that imposed the suspension is now publicly calling for it to end. Infantino told Sky Sports, and we are quoting directly here, that the ban had achieved nothing, and it only created more frustration and hatred. He went even further than that. Infantino said FIFA should actually never ban any country from playing football because of the acts of their political leaders, adding that somebody needs to keep the ties open. This was not a casual, offhand remark. This was the FIFA president, in a formal interview, dismantling the logic behind one of the most significant sporting bans in modern history. The question every football fan immediately had was, why now? Why, with the World Cup weeks away, would the head of global football decide this was the moment to reopen this wound? Some believe it comes down to principle. Infantino has long argued that sport should remain a bridge between nations, not a weapon of geopolitical pressure. He previously stated at a UEFA Congress that he wanted to bring Russia back into the football landscape, because doing so would mean that everything is solved. That is the official line. Football as a force for reconciliation. But critics see something far more cynical at play. Infantino had already faced widespread criticism in December 2025, when he created a specific FIFA Peace Prize to award to US President Donald Trump at the 2026 World Cup draw, with insiders suggesting the award was fabricated solely to flatter Trump, with no shortlist or consultation process. Against that backdrop, calling for Russia's reintegration does not read simply as idealism. It reads as the FIFA president aligning himself with a very specific vision of global politics at a very specific moment in history. The reaction was immediate, and it was fierce. Ukraine's sports minister Matvei Bidny issued a furious statement condemning Infantino's stance, saying his words sound irresponsible and detach football from the reality in which children are being killed. That is not diplomatic language. That is raw grief. That is a country still under bombardment watching the head of world football essentially argue that the sporting punishment for invading a sovereign nation should be quietly forgotten. Russia, meanwhile, had been kicked out of qualifying for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, unable to participate in Euro 2024 qualifying, and frozen out of the 2026 World Cup cycle entirely. 4 years, 2 World Cups. A generation of Russian players has effectively had their careers shaped by this suspension. UEFA President Alexander Cheferin has consistently maintained that the war in Ukraine needs to end for Russia to be reinstated. That is a firm, clear, unmovable position, and it stands in direct opposition to what Infantino has been saying. The two most powerful men in European and world football are publicly at odds on one of the most sensitive issues in international sport. In 2023, FIFA briefly attempted to let Russia compete in under-17 Continental Championship qualifying, citing a desire not to punish children for government actions. UEFA relented and upheld the ban after a dozen national federations threatened to boycott matches with Russia. England, Poland, Sweden, Ukraine, nations that had fought in court, protested in boardrooms, and refused to play against Russian teams, simply walked away from the table and said no. Not until the war ends. Think about what that means for Infantino's vision of reintegration. Even if FIFA wanted to vote on lifting the ban tomorrow, the practical reality is that half of Europe would refuse to play. Currently, there are no plans for the FIFA Council to vote on the matter, primarily due to intense opposition from UEFA member nations. So the debate rages on paper, in press conferences, on football news channels exactly like this one. But in the real world, Russia remains banned. And here is the detail that really cuts through all the noise. Russia has appeared at 11 World Cups in total, including 7 editions under the Soviet Union banner. Its best performance came in 1966, when the Soviet Union reached the semifinals and finished 4th. This is a football nation with real depth, real history, real heritage. Players across Europe, in the Russian Premier League, previously at top European clubs, have had their international careers frozen. Some of those players were not even born when Putin first came to power. Some of them never made a political decision in their lives, and yet they have been swept up in one of sport's most extraordinary geopolitical standoffs. That is the human cost of this story that often gets lost in the headlines. The 2026 World Cup in the United States, Canada, and Mexico is going to be historic for 100 reasons. It will be the first to feature an expanded format with 48 teams instead of the usual 32. More nations than ever, more stories, more history. But as the tournament approaches, the shadow of the Russia question hangs over world football. Infantino wants the door opened. Europe wants it kept shut. And the war, the actual war, the one that started all of this, continues. What does this mean for you as a football fan? It means the next few months are going to be intense. If Infantino pushes harder on reintegration after the tournament ends, there will be war. Not the one in Ukraine, but a war inside FIFA itself. European federations have made it clear where they stand. If Russia comes back to football with boots on the ground still in Kyiv, there will be boycotts. There will be drama at a scale we have not seen since the Cold War shaped the 1950 and 1980 editions. And the most unsettling part of all of this is that nobody knows how it ends. Not today, not this summer. Because this is not a story that gets resolved in a boardroom. It gets resolved when the guns stop. And until then, Russia's absence from the greatest show in football will remain one of the defining symbols of how deeply war reaches into every corner of the world. Even the corners we thought belonged only to the beautiful game. If this story had you gripped, drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Where do you stand? Should Russia be allowed back into football, or does the ban need to stay until the war ends? Let us know, because this debate is only going to get louder. Hit subscribe if you are not already on board with Football Brief, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. We will see you in the next video.